They took my chair at the front. I didn't protest. I just waited for the will. The funeral director had arranged the seating with military precision. Front row for immediate family, second row for close relatives, third row for friends and colleagues. I had been sitting in the front row, center seat, when my stepchildren arrived. Marcus, 34 and sharp in his expensive suit, surveyed the room like a general assessing a battlefield. Behind him, his sister Elena clutched her husband's arm, her eyes red-rimmed but calculating. "Excuse me," Marcus said, his voice carrying the particular authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "I think there's been some confusion about the seating." The funeral director, a thin man with practiced sympathy, looked between us uncertainly. "I was told Mrs. Whitmore was the immediate family. Mrs. Whitmore was married to our father for 3 years," Elena interrupted, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. "We are his children. We've been his family for 34 years. I felt the eyes of the gathered mourners on me, watching this small drama unfold with the fascination people reserve for public humiliation. The smart thing would have been to argue, to assert my rights as Harold's widow, to claim the seat that was legally and morally mine. Instead, I stood quietly and moved to the second row, settling myself behind the chair that had been mine for exactly 7 minutes. "Thank you for understanding," Marcus said, though his tone suggested he'd expected compliance rather than gratitude. "This is difficult enough without complications." Complications. That's what I was to them. Not a grieving widow, not someone who had loved their father, but a complication to be managed and minimized. Harold's funeral was everything he would have hated. Formal, stuffy, filled with people who spoke of him in the past tense, as if he were already becoming a memory rather than a man who had been vibrantly alive just 5 days ago. The pastor, who had met Harold exactly once, spoke of his devotion to family and successful business career in the generic terms reserved for strangers. I sat in my second row seat, hands folded in my lap, listening to this sanitized version of the man I'd married. They didn't mention his terrible jokes or his habit of singing off-key in the shower. They didn't talk about how he'd learned to make my grandmother's apple pie recipe, practicing in secret for weeks before surprising me on my birthday. They didn't speak of the way he'd held my hand during my cancer treatments, or how he'd cried the night the doctors told us I was in remission. Harold Whitmore was a pillar of the community, the pastor continued. A successful businessman who built his company from the ground up, a devoted father who provided well for his family. True, all of it, but incomplete. Harold had also been a man who'd found love again at 68, who'd been brave enough to marry a woman 20 years younger, despite his children's vocal disapproval. Who'd spent the last 3 years of his life happier than he'd been since his first wife died. Marcus had given the eulogy, speaking eloquently about his father's business acumen and community involvement. He'd mentioned Harold's first marriage to their mother, dead now for 8 years, with reverent detail. He'd talked about family traditions and shared memories, painting a picture of a complete family unit that had no room for the woman who'd shared Harold's bed for the past 3 years. I wasn't mentioned at all. After the service, as people filed past the casket to pay their respects, I remained in my seat. I would go last, I decided. I would have my private moment with Harold after his children had finished performing their grief for the assembled crowd. Mrs. Whitmore, a woman I didn't recognize, approached my row. She was perhaps 60, well-dressed, with kind eyes that seemed genuinely sympathetic. "I'm Janet Morrison, Harold's attorney. I wonder if I might have a word with you." I followed her to a quiet corner of the funeral home, away from the receiving line, where Marcus and Elena were accepting condolences with the practiced grace of people accustomed to being the center of attention. "I wanted to speak with you about Harold's will," Janet said quietly. "The reading is scheduled for tomorrow at 2 o'clock. I trust you'll be able to attend." "Of course." I paused, watching Marcus shake hands with Harold's business associates, playing the role of grieving son with convincing sincerity. "Will they be there as well?" Janet followed my gaze. "All beneficiaries will be present." "Yes, beneficiaries." The word implied that Harold had left me something, though I couldn't imagine what. We'd lived comfortably but not extravagantly. The house was his, bought and paid for long before we met. The business was a family enterprise that Marcus had been running for the past 5 years. Harold's assets were tied up in investments and properties that predated our marriage. Mrs. Whitmore, Janet said carefully, I think you should know that Harold's will contains some unexpected provisions. Tomorrow may be difficult for everyone involved. More difficult than today. Janet's smile was sympathetic. Harold was very specific about his wishes. He spent considerable time ensuring that his will reflected his true intentions, not just his legal obligations. Before I could ask what that meant, Marcus appeared at my elbow. His smile was polite but cold, the expression of someone fulfilling a social obligation. Mrs. Whitmore, he said, Alina and I wanted to thank you for making Dad's last years comfortable. We know you cared for him, and we appreciate that. The words were carefully chosen, I realized. Not loved him, but cared for him. Not made him happy, but made him comfortable. He was already rewriting the narrative of my marriage, reducing it to a caregiving arrangement rather than a love story. Your father was very happy these past 3 years, I said quietly. Yes, well, Marcus's smile tightened. He deserved some peace in his final years. After Mom died, he was lost for a long time. It was good that he found ... companionship. Companionship. Another careful word, another diminishment. Not partnership, not love, not marriage, just companionship, as if I'd been a paid companion rather than a wife. We'll see you tomorrow. I assume Alina had joined us, her husband hovering protectively behind her. For the will reading, yes, good. We want to make sure everything is handled properly, that there are no ... misunderstandings. I nodded, though I wasn't sure what misunderstandings they were worried about. Harold and I had never discussed his will in detail, but I'd assumed it would be straightforward. The bulk of his estate to his children, perhaps a small bequest to me, enough to ensure I wouldn't be destitute, but not enough to cause resentment. As the funeral home emptied and the family prepared to leave for the cemetery, I finally approached Harold's casket. He looked peaceful, younger somehow, as if death had erased the worry lines that had deepened over the past year as his health declined. I'm sorry about the chair, I whispered, touching the smooth wood of the casket. I should have fought for it. You would have wanted me in the front row. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. Harold had been a peacekeeper, a man who avoided conflict whenever possible. He would have understood why I'd moved, would have appreciated my desire to keep the peace even at my own expense. Tomorrow, I continued, I'll find out what you really thought of our marriage. I'll find out if 3 years was long enough to matter, if love was enough to overcome 20 years of prior claim. The funeral director approached discreetly, indicating that it was time to leave for the cemetery. I kissed my fingertips and pressed them to the casket, then walked away from my husband for the last time. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions I wasn't sure I wanted to ask. Tonight, I would go home to the house that might not be mine much longer and try to prepare myself for whatever Harold's final gift or final betrayal might be. As I drove to the cemetery behind the hearse, I caught sight of Marcus and Alina in the car ahead of me. They sat close together, united in their grief and their certainty that they were the rightful inheritors of their father's legacy. I sat alone in my car, the widow who'd been displaced from her own husband's funeral, and wondered if tomorrow would bring vindication or just another, more final displacement. The cemetery was only 10 minutes away, but it felt like a journey to the edge of the world. The cemetery service was mercifully brief, conducted under a gray October sky that threatened rain but never delivered. I stood at the back of the small crowd gathered around Harold's grave, watching his children claim their positions at the graveside with the same quiet authority they'd shown at the funeral home. Alina wept openly, her sobs carrying across the autumn air with theatrical precision. Marcus stood stoic and dry, one hand on his sister's shoulder in a gesture that managed to be both comforting and possessive. They were a unit, these two, bound by shared history and shared blood in a way that my 3 years of marriage could never match. The pastor spoke briefly about resurrection and eternal rest, words that felt hollow in the crisp air. Harold hadn't been particularly religious, but his children had insisted on a traditional service, another way of claiming ownership over his memory, his legacy, his final chapter. As the crowd began to disperse, I remained by the grave, waiting for my moment of private goodbye. But Marcus approached before I could step forward, his expression carefully neutral. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "we wanted to discuss some practical matters with you, about the house, about Dad's affairs." I thought that was what tomorrow's meeting was for. "Tomorrow is for the legal formalities," Elena said, joining us with her husband trailing behind. "But there are some things we should clarify beforehand, to avoid any awkwardness." I waited, sensing that this conversation had been planned, rehearsed even. "The house," Marcus continued, "has been in our family for 30 years. Dad bought it when Elena and I were children. Our mother decorated it, raised us there. It's full of family memories, family history. I understand that. Do you?" Elena's voice was sharper now, her grief temporarily set aside for more practical concerns. "Because we want to make sure you understand that whatever Dad's will says, that house is our family home. It belongs with us." The implication was clear. I was not family, not really. I was an interloper, a temporary resident in a space that belonged to Harold's real family. "Your father and I lived there together for 3 years," I said quietly. "It was our home." "For 3 years," Marcus emphasized. "We lived there for 18 years. Our mother lived there for 22 years. You were a guest, Mrs. Whitmore, a welcomed guest, but a guest nonetheless." The words stung because they contained just enough truth to be devastating. I had been a guest in many ways, careful not to change too much, not to erase too many traces of the woman who had come before me. Harold's first wife's china still filled the dining room cabinets. Her garden still bloomed with the perennials she'd planted. Her presence lingered in every room, a ghost I'd learned to live with rather than exorcise. "We're not trying to be cruel," Elena said, her voice softening slightly. "We know you loved Dad, and we know he cared for you, but you have to understand our position. That house is all we have left of our childhood, of our mother, of the family we were before, .. double quotes before me." She didn't say it, but the words hung in the air between us. "We're prepared to be generous," Marcus added. "Whatever Dad left you, we'll honor it, but we hope you'll be reasonable about the house. We hope you'll understand that some things are more important than legal documents." I looked at these two people who shared Harold's eyes, his stubborn chin, his way of tilting their heads when they were thinking. They were his children, his blood, his legacy in a way I could never be. And they were asking me to voluntarily give up any claim to the home I'd shared with their father. To acknowledge that 3 years of marriage was less significant than 30 years of history. "I'll consider what you've said," I replied. Because it was easier than arguing, easier than defending my right to grieve in the home where Harold and I had been happy. "Thank you," Elena said, relief evident in her voice. "We knew you'd be reasonable. Dad always said you were very understanding." Understanding, another careful word, another way of diminishing my role in Harold's life. Not passionate, not beloved, not cherished, just understanding. The kind of woman who wouldn't make waves, wouldn't cause trouble, wouldn't fight for what was hers. As they walked away, I finally approached Harold's grave. The flowers were beautiful, elaborate arrangements from the funeral home, simple bouquets from friends, a single white rose that I'd brought but hadn't had the chance to place. I knelt and laid my rose among the others, a small gesture that felt both significant and futile. "They want me to give up the house," I whispered to the fresh earth. "They want me to understand that 3 years isn't enough to matter, that love isn't enough to claim a place in your family." The wind rustled through the oak trees that surrounded the cemetery, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and the promise of winter. Harold had loved autumn, had spent hours raking leaves into perfect piles that he'd then let me jump through like a child. Such a small thing, but it had made us both laugh, had reminded us that joy could be found in the simplest moments. "I don't know what you left me," I continued. I don't know if you thought 3 years was enough to matter, but I need you to know that they were the best 3 years of my life. You made me feel young again, made me feel beautiful again, made me feel like I deserved to be loved. A car door slammed in the distance, and I looked up to see the last of the mourners driving away. I was alone now with Harold and the groundskeepers, who were waiting respectfully at a distance for me to finish my goodbye. I thought about the night Harold had proposed, 18 months into our relationship. We'd been sitting on the porch of the house his children now wanted to reclaim, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. He'd been quiet all evening, unusually serious, and I'd wondered if he was having second thoughts about us. About the relationship that had surprised us both with its intensity. "Margaret," he'd said finally, "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." I'd braced myself for the conversation. I'd been dreading the one where he explained that what we had was wonderful but temporary, that he wasn't ready for anything more serious, that his children's disapproval was wearing him down. "Are you happy?" He'd asked instead. "What do you mean?" "I mean, are you happy with me? With this? With the way we are together? Because I am? I'm happier than I've been in 8 years, happier than I thought I'd ever be again. And if you're happy to, if this feels as right to you as it does to me, then I want to ask you to marry me." The proposal had been simple, practical, delivered with the straightforward honesty that had drawn me to Harold in the first place. No grand gestures, no elaborate plans, just a man asking a woman if she wanted to build a life together. "Yes," I'd said, and meant it completely. The wedding had been small, held in the garden behind the house with just a few close friends in attendance. Marcus and Alina had been invited, but hadn't come. Their absence a pointed reminder that they didn't approve of their father's choice to remarry. Harold had been hurt by their boycott, but he'd tried to hide it, focusing instead on the joy of the day, the promise of the future we were creating together. "They'll come around," he'd said that night as we lay in bed as husband and wife for the first time. "They just need time to see how happy you make me." But they hadn't come around. If anything, their resentment had deepened over the 3 years of our marriage, manifesting in missed holidays, declined invitations, and a careful politeness that was more hurtful than outright hostility would have been. Now, kneeling beside Harold's grave, I wondered if he'd known how his children would treat me after his death. Had he anticipated their attempt to erase me from his legacy, to reduce our marriage to a footnote in the larger story of his life? Had he planned for this moment when I would be forced to choose between fighting for my place in his family and preserving the peace he'd always valued? "Tomorrow I'll find out," I said, standing and brushing dirt from my knees. "Tomorrow, I'll learn what you really thought our marriage was worth." As I walked back to my car, I passed the groundskeepers who were preparing to fill in Harold's grave. By tomorrow, there would be no visible sign of the burial, just another headstone in a field of headstones. Another life reduced to dates and brief inscriptions. But tonight, I would go home to the house that might not be mine much longer and try to prepare myself for whatever Harold's will would reveal about the true value of 3 years of love in a world that measured worth in decades and bloodlines. The drive home took me past the places Harold and I had shared, the restaurant where we'd had our first date, the park where we'd walked on Sunday mornings, the bookstore where he'd bought me poetry collections because he said my voice made even the simplest words sound like music. 3 years of memories, 3 years of building a life together, 3 years of love that had been real and precious, and apparently not quite enough to earn me a chair in the front row at my own husband's funeral. Tomorrow would tell me if it had been enough for anything else. Janet Morrison's law office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian mansion downtown. All polished wood and brass fixtures that spoke of old-fashioned respectability. One arrived 10 minutes early. My hands steady, despite the sleepless night I'd spent wondering what Harold's will would reveal about the true nature of our marriage. Marcus and Alina were already there, seated side by side in leather chairs, facing Janet's mahogany desk. They looked up when I entered, their expressions carefully neutral, as if we were business associates rather than family members gathering to divide up the remnants of a shared life. Mrs. Whitmore, Janet said, rising from behind her desk. Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat. The only remaining chair was positioned slightly apart from Marcus and Elena, another small displacement that felt both accidental and deliberate. I settled myself and folded my hands in my lap. The same posture I'd adopted at the funeral when I'd been moved to the second row. Before we begin, Janet said, opening a thick folder, I want to explain that Harold's will is quite detailed. He spent considerable time crafting it, and he left specific instructions about how certain provisions should be presented. She pulled out several documents, arranging them carefully on the desk. Harold also left individual letters for each of you to be read after the will itself. He felt it was important that you understand not just what he was leaving you, but why. Marcus shifted in his chair, his lawyer's instincts clearly engaged. How recent is this will? When was it last updated? Harold made his final revisions 6 months ago, Janet replied. Everything was properly witnessed and notarized. I can assure you that he was of sound mind and acting without any undue influence. The emphasis on undue influence was clearly directed at me, though Janet's tone remained professionally neutral. I felt Marcus and Elena's eyes on me, their suspicion palpable even in the formal atmosphere of the law office. Shall we begin? Janet asked, though it wasn't really a question. She picked up the first document and began to read. I, Harold James Whitmore, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make this my last will and testament, revoking all previous wills and codicils. The formal language washed over me as Janet read through the standard legal provisions. Harold had been methodical in his planning, addressing debts, taxes, and administrative details with the same careful attention he'd brought to his business dealings. To my children, Marcus James Whitmore and Elena Whitmore Patterson, I leave my business, Whitmore and Associates, to be divided equally between them. This includes all assets, accounts, and properties associated with the business, with the exception of the downtown office building, which is addressed separately below. Marcus and Elena exchanged glances, relief evident on their faces. The business was the most valuable part of Harold's estate, worth several $1 million. They had expected to inherit it, but hearing it confirmed seemed to ease some of their tension. I also leave to Marcus and Elena the contents of the safe deposit box at First National Bank, which contains family jewelry, photographs, and documents dating back to our family's early history. These items represent our shared heritage and should remain with my children and their descendants. Janet paused, looking up at the three of us. There are also specific bequests to several charities and longtime employees, but the major provisions concern the house and the downtown office building. She picked up another document, and I felt my stomach tighten with anticipation. To my beloved wife, Margaret Rose Whitmore, I leave the family home at 1247 Maple Street, along with all furnishings, personal effects, and household items contained therein. This house has been our home for 3 years, and it should remain hers for as long as she wishes to live there. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Elena gasped audibly, and Marcus's face went white with shock. I felt my own breath catch, hardly daring to believe what I'd heard. That's impossible, Elena said, her voice rising. That house has been in our family for 30 years. Our mother's things are there, our childhood memories, please. Janet said gently, let me finish reading the relevant section. She continued, I know this decision will be difficult for Marcus and Elena to understand. The house contains many memories of their mother and their childhood, and I do not make this bequest lightly. However, Margaret has been my wife and companion for 3 years. She has made that house a home again, has filled it with love and laughter after years of emptiness following their mother's death. She deserves to live out her days in the place where we were happiest together. Marcus stood abruptly, pacing to the window. This is ridiculous. Dad was clearly not thinking straight. 3 years versus 30 years, there's no comparison. Harold was very much in his right mind, Janet said firmly. He anticipated your reaction, which is why he included this next section. She read on. I understand that my children may feel this bequest is unfair or inappropriate. I want them to know that this decision comes not from any lack of love for them, but from a deep love for the woman who chose to share my final years. Margaret asked for nothing when she married me. She moved into a house filled with another woman's belongings, adapted to another woman's routines, and never once complained or asked me to change anything. She deserves better than to be displaced again in death. Alina was crying now. Not the theatrical tears of the funeral, but real, raw grief. How could he do this to us? How could he give away our family home to someone he barely knew? 3 years isn't barely knowing someone, I said quietly, speaking for the first time since Janet had begun reading. It's nothing compared to a lifetime, Marcus snapped, turning from the window. You were a phase, Mrs. Whitmore. A late-life crisis. You can't seriously think 3 years of marriage gives you the right to our family home. Harold thought it did, Janet said, her voice carrying a warning. And there's more. She picked up another document. I also leave to Margaret the downtown office building at 412 Commerce Street, currently leased to various tenants, along with all rental income generated by said property. This building represents a significant source of ongoing income and should provide Margaret with financial security for the remainder of her life. The silence that followed was deafening. The office building was worth at least $1 million, and the rental income would provide a substantial monthly payment. Harold hadn't just left me the house, he'd left me financial independence. This is insane, Marcus said, his composure finally cracking. He's given away half his estate to someone he knew for 3 years. We're his children. We're his blood. And Margaret was his wife, Janet replied calmly. His chosen companion for the final years of his life. Alina looked up from her tears, her face flushed with anger and grief. She manipulated him. She had to have manipulated him. Our father would never have done this on his own. Your father, Janet said, her voice growing stern, spent months crafting this will. He consulted with me extensively, revised it multiple times, and made his final decisions with complete clarity about their implications. He knew exactly what he was doing. She reached for another set of documents. Harold also left individual letters for each of you. Perhaps these will help you understand his reasoning. She handed Marcus and Alina their letters, then passed one to me. My name was written on the envelope in Harold's familiar handwriting. The same careful script he'd used to write me love notes that he'd leave on my pillow when he traveled for business. I'll give you a few minutes to read these privately, Janet said, stepping out of the office. I opened my letter with trembling hands. My dearest Margaret, if you're reading this, then you've just learned that I've left you the house and the office building. I imagine Marcus and Alina are not pleased with this decision, and I'm sorry for the pain it will cause them, but I'm not sorry for making it. You gave me 3 years of happiness I never expected to have again. You brought laughter back into that house, brought warmth back into my life, brought hope back into my heart. You deserved so much more than I was able to give you while I was alive, more than a house filled with another woman's memories, more than children who never accepted you, more than a husband who was sometimes too tired or too set in his ways to show you how much you meant to him. I can't give you back the years we didn't have together, but I can give you security and independence for the years ahead. The house is yours because you made it ours. The building is yours because you deserve to never worry about money again, to never feel dependent or uncertain about your future. My children will be angry, and I understand their anger, but they have each other, they have their own families, they have the business that will provide for them for the rest of their lives. You have only what I can give you, and I want to give you everything I can. Live in that house as long as it makes you happy. Change whatever you want to change. Keep whatever you want to keep. Make it truly yours in a way I never allowed you to do while I was alive. You were not a phase or a late-life crisis, as I'm sure my children will claim. You were the love of my autumn years, the woman who proved to me that it's never too late to start over, never too late to find joy again. Thank you for 3 years of happiness. Thank you for saying yes when I asked you to marry me. Thank you for making an old man feel young again. All my love, always. Harold, I folded the letter carefully, my eyes blurring with tears. Across the room, Marcus and Alina were reading their own letters, their faces cycling through emotions I couldn't read. When Janet returned, the atmosphere in the room had shifted. The anger was still there, but it was tempered now with something else, perhaps understanding, perhaps resignation. "Are there any questions about the will?" Janet asked. Marcus looked up from his letter, his face pale but calmer. "The bequests are final. There's no provision for contesting them. The will is ironclad," Janet confirmed. Harold was very thorough. Alina wiped her eyes and looked at me directly for the first time since the reading began. "What did his letter say to you?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. That he loved me, that he wanted me to be secure, that he hoped you would understand someday. She nodded slowly, then looked down at her own letter. "He said the same thing to us. About loving you? About wanting us to understand." The room fell quiet again, heavy with the weight of Harold's final words to all of us. Outside, life continued. Cars passing, people walking, the ordinary rhythm of a Tuesday afternoon. But inside this office, 3 people were grappling with the reality that love could be measured in legal documents, that a man's final wishes could reshape the landscape of grief and inheritance in ways none of us had anticipated. Harold had given me more than a house and a building. He had given me validation, recognition, a place in his legacy that no one could take away. The question now was whether his children would ever forgive him or me for it. The silence in Janet's office stretched on, heavy with the weight of Harold's revelations. Marcus sat staring at his letter, his jaw working as if he were chewing over words too difficult to swallow. Alina had stopped crying, but her face remained flushed, her breathing shallow with the effort of controlling her emotions. "There's one more thing," Janet said quietly, breaking the silence. Harold left specific instructions about how he wanted his personal effects distributed, items that aren't covered by the general bequest of household contents. She pulled out a handwritten list in Harold's careful script. These are items he wanted to go to, specific people, with explanations for each choice. Marcus looked up sharply. What kind of items? Personal things. His watch, his father's ring, some books, photographs. Janet consulted the list. To Marcus, he left his father's gold pocket watch and the leather-bound set of Shakespeare that belonged to his grandfather. To Elena, he left his mother's pearl necklace and the family Bible. Elena's face crumpled again. Those were already ours. Those things were always going to come to us. Yes, but Harold wanted to make sure you understood why he was giving them to you specifically. Janet read from the list. These items represent our family history, the legacy that connects my children to their grandparents and great-grandparents. They belong with Marcus and Alina because they are the continuation of our bloodline, the keepers of our family stories. I felt a familiar pang at the word bloodline, another reminder that despite 3 years of marriage, I remained outside the circle of Harold's true family, connected to him by choice rather than birth. To Margaret, Janet continued, he left his collection of poetry books, his reading glasses, and the photograph of the 2 of you from your wedding day that he kept on his desk at the office. The items were small, personal, chosen not for their monetary value but for their emotional significance. Harold's poetry books were filled with his marginalia, his thoughts and reactions to verses that had moved him. His reading glasses had sat on his nose during countless evenings when we'd read together in comfortable silence. The wedding photograph captured the moment just after we'd been pronounced husband and wife, both of us laughing at something the minister had whispered. He also left instructions about his study, Janet said. Margaret, he wanted you to know that the room is yours to do with as you please. He said you'd always been careful not to disturb his space, but that it should become your space now. Harold's study had been his sanctuary, filled with business papers and family photographs, his father's desk and his grandfather's chair. I'd cleaned it and organized it, but I'd never felt comfortable changing anything, never felt like I had the right to make it mine. That's very generous, I said quietly, though the words felt inadequate. Marcus stood abruptly and walked to the window again, his back rigid with tension. I need to understand something. he said without turning around. This will, when did Dad start working on it? When did he decide to restructure everything? Janet consulted her files. Harold first came to see me about updating his will about a year after he married Margaret. But the major revisions, the ones we've just read, were made over the past 6 months. 6 months, Alina repeated. Right after his heart attack scare. Yes, Harold said the incident made him realize he needed to be more deliberate about his legacy, more intentional about how he wanted to provide for the people he loved. Marcus turned back to face us, his expression troubled. Did he say anything else? About his reasons, about why he felt the need to make such drastic changes. Janet hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Harold was very concerned about Margaret's future. He worried that without significant provisions in his will, she would be left vulnerable after his death. He said his children had their own resources, their own families, their own support systems. Margaret had only him. The truth of it hung in the air between us. Marcus and Alina had spouses, children, careers, networks of friends and family that extended far beyond their relationship with Harold. I had built my life around my marriage, had moved to Harold's town, had left my job and my friends to be with him. Without him, I was alone in a way his children would never be. He also, Janet continued carefully, expressed concern about how Margaret might be treated after his death. He worried that she might be made to feel unwelcome in the home they'd shared, that she might be pressured to give up her rightful place in his legacy. Marcus's face flushed red. Are you saying he thought we would try to cheat her out of her inheritance? I'm saying he wanted to make sure that couldn't happen, intentionally or otherwise. Alina spoke up, her voice small and uncertain. Did he think we hated her? Did he think we would be cruel to her? Janet's expression softened. He thought you were grieving your mother and struggling to accept that he had found love again. He understood your feelings, but he also felt a responsibility to protect the woman he'd chosen to spend his final years with, I thought. About the conversations Harold and I had had about his children, the careful way he'd navigated between his love for them and his love for me. He'd never asked me to compete with their mother's memory, but he'd also never asked me to pretend I didn't exist. There's something else, I said, surprising myself by speaking up. Something Harold told me that might help you understand. Marcus and Alina both looked at me, their expressions wary but curious. About 6 months ago, after his heart attack, Harold said something to me. He said he'd realized that he'd been living his life trying to preserve the past instead of embracing the present. He said he'd been so afraid of dishonoring your mother's memory that he'd forgotten how to build new memories. I paused, gathering my courage to continue. He said he wanted his final years to count for something, to matter in their own right, rather than just being a postscript to his first marriage. He said he wanted to live fully, love fully, and leave a legacy that reflected all the phases of his life, not just the early ones. Alina wiped her eyes with a tissue. He said something similar in his letter to me, about not wanting to spend his remaining years as a museum curator of his own life. Marcus returned to his chair, his anger seeming to deflate into something more complex, grief, perhaps, or a reluctant understanding. In my letter, he wrote about the difference between honoring the past and being imprisoned by it. We sat in silence for several minutes, each of us processing Harold's words and their implications. Janet gathered the legal documents, giving us space to absorb what we'd learned. I have a question, Alina said finally, looking at me directly. What are you going to do with the house? Are you going to ... change things? The question was loaded with meaning. Alina was asking whether I planned to erase her mother's presence, to remake the house in my own image, now that I had the legal right to do so. I don't know, I answered honestly. Some things, maybe. Harold's study. Certainly, he wanted me to make it mine. But your mother's garden, her china, the family photographs, those are part of the house's history. They were there before me, and they should probably stay, even though you could get rid of them now, even though the house is legally yours. Especially because the house is legally yours, Marcus said quietly, and I looked at him in surprise. Dad was right about one thing. You never tried to erase Mom's presence. You could have made his life easier by demanding changes, but you didn't. Alina nodded slowly. I remember visiting that first Christmas after you and Dad got married. I was looking for signs that you'd taken over, that you'd pushed Mom out of her own house. But everything was exactly the same. Even the Christmas decorations were the ones Mom had used. Because they were beautiful, I said, because they were part of what made the house feel like home to Harold. I didn't want to take that away from him, but now, Marcus asked, now that he's gone, now that the house is yours. I thought about Harold's letter, his instruction to make the house truly mine, to change whatever I wanted to change. Now I think I'll try to find a balance. Keep the things that honor the past, change the things that will help me build a future. Janet cleared her throat gently. If there are no other questions about the will itself, I do need to discuss some practical matters. The transfer of assets, tax implications, timelines for various transactions. For the next hour, we worked through the administrative details of Harold's death, the paperwork that would transfer ownership of the house and building to me. The documents that would give Marcus and Alina control of the business, the various forms and filings that would officially end Harold's legal existence and distribute his worldly goods among the living. It was tedious work, but it gave us all time to process what had happened, to begin adjusting to the new reality Harold's will had created. By the time we finished, the afternoon shadows were growing long outside Janet's windows. I think that covers everything for today, Janet said, gathering the papers into neat stacks. Margaret, I'll need you to come in next week to sign the property transfer documents. Marcus, Alina, the business transfer paperwork should be ready by Friday. As we prepared to leave, Alina approached me hesitantly. Margaret, I wonder would it be all right if I came by the house sometime? To get a few things of Mom's that aren't really valuable but mean something to me? Of course, I said. Anytime you want. It's still your family home, Alina. That doesn't change just because the deed has my name on it. Marcus paused at the door. For what it's worth, I think Dad made the right choice. I don't like it, and I don't understand it completely, but I think he knew what he was doing. As we walked out of Janet's office together, I realized that something fundamental had shifted between us. We weren't friends, might never be friends, but we were no longer enemies either. We were three people bound together by our love for Harold, trying to honor his memory while figuring out how to move forward without him. Harold's will had done more than distribute his assets. It had forced us to see each other as he had seen us. To understand that love could take many forms and that family could be defined by choice as well as blood. It was a gift I hadn't expected, and one I wasn't sure any of us deserved, but it was Harold's final gift to all of us, and perhaps the most valuable thing he could have left behind. 3 months later, I stood in Harold's study, my study now, watching the morning sun stream through windows. I'd finally felt brave enough to wash. The room looked different with the heavy drapes, replaced by simple white curtains, with fresh flowers on the desk where Harold's business papers used to pile up. With my own books, sharing shelf space with his collection of business journals, it was still recognizably Harold's room, but it was becoming mine too. The doorbell rang, and I went to answer it, knowing who I'd find on the other side. Alina stood on the porch holding a casserole dish, her monthly offering that had become a ritual neither of us quite knew how to break. "Chicken and rice," she said, holding up the dish. I made too much again. It was a polite fiction. Alina never made too much of anything. She was too precise a cook for that. But she'd been bringing me food once a month since Harold's funeral. And I'd learned to accept these offerings for what they really were. Her way of checking on me, of maintaining a connection to the house where she'd grown up. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. I just made coffee. We'd developed a routine over these visits. Alina would bring food, I would make coffee, and we would sit in the kitchen, neutral territory, and talk about safe subjects. The weather, the neighborhood, Elena's children, my plans for the garden. Today felt different though. Alina seemed more relaxed, less careful about what she touched or where she looked. She'd been gradually letting go of the vigilance that had marked her early visits, when she'd watched me like a hawk for signs that I was erasing her mother's presence from the house. "The living room looks nice," she said as we passed through it. "I like what you've done with the mantle." I'd finally rearranged the family photographs, creating space for the wedding picture Harold had kept at his office, alongside the older images of his first family. It had taken me 2 months to work up the courage to make that change, but Elena's approval felt like a small victory. In the kitchen, I poured coffee while Elena unpacked her casserole and arranged it in the refrigerator with the careful precision she brought to everything. She'd inherited Harold's attention to detail, his need for order and organization. "How are the renovations going upstairs?" she asked, settling into the chair that had become hers during these visits. "Slowly. I'm having the master bathroom redone. New tile, new fixtures. And I'm thinking about converting the small bedroom into a reading room." Elena nodded. Mom always wanted to redo that bathroom. She had plans drawn up, but Dad kept saying it was too expensive. It was the first time Elena had mentioned her mother's unfulfilled plans for the house, the first acknowledgement that even the perfect family home had room for improvement. "I found the plans," I said carefully. "They were in Harold's desk. Beautiful designs, much more elegant than what I'm doing. You could use them if you wanted." I'm sure Mom would have liked that. The offer surprised me. Elena was giving me permission to fulfill her mother's vision, to honor the first Mrs. Whitmore's dreams for the house in a way that felt both generous and healing. "I'd like that," I said. "Thank you." We drank our coffee in comfortable silence, a far cry from the tense conversations of our early encounters. Through the kitchen window, I could see the garden, where Harold and I had spent so many peaceful mornings, where I still felt his presence most strongly. "Margaret," Elena said suddenly, "I need to tell you something. About the will, about how angry I was." I waited, sensing that this was important. I read Dad's letter again last week, the one he left for me, and I realized something I'd missed before. Elena set down her coffee cup, her hands trembling slightly. He wrote about how much he loved Mom, how losing her nearly destroyed him. But he also wrote about how meeting you saved him from becoming a bitter old man, living in the past. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. He said, "You gave him permission to be happy again, to build something new instead of just maintaining something old." He said, "You taught him that loving someone new didn't mean loving someone less." The words hit me with unexpected force. Harold had never told me I'd saved him from anything. He'd been too proud, too independent to admit he'd needed saving. He also wrote, Elena continued, that he hoped someday I would understand the difference between honoring memory and being trapped by it. He said he wanted me to learn from his example, to know that it's possible to love fully more than once in a lifetime. I thought about Elena's marriage, her young children, the life she was building with her husband. "Are you happy, Elena, in your marriage?" She smiled, the first completely unguarded smile she'd ever given me. "Very happy. But I used to worry sometimes that if something happened to David, I could never love anyone else the way I love him." Dad's letter made me realize that love isn't finite, that opening your heart to someone new doesn't diminish what you felt for someone else. "Your father taught me the same thing." I said, "I was married before, you know? My first husband died when I was 38. I thought that was it for me, that I'd had my chance at love and lost it." Elena looked surprised. "I didn't know you'd been married before." Harold knew. It's one of the reasons he understood how precious and fragile love can be, how important it is to embrace it when you find it again. We sat quietly for a moment. Two women who had learned about love and loss from the same man, who had been shaped by his wisdom in different but equally profound ways. "I have something for you," Elena said, reaching into her purse. "I've been carrying it around for weeks, trying to work up the courage to give it to you." She pulled out a small velvet box and placed it on the table between us. It was Mom's engagement ring. Dad gave it back to her family after she died, but my aunt returned it to me last year. She said it should stay in the Whitmore family. I stared at the box, afraid to touch it. "Elena, I can't." "Yes, you can. You're a Whitmore too, whether you were born one or not. And Mom would have wanted you to have it. She would have understood what you meant to Dad, what you gave him in his final years." With trembling hands, I opened the box. Inside was a simple solitaire diamond, elegant and timeless. Exactly the kind of ring Harold would have chosen for his first love. "It's beautiful," I whispered. "Dad never stopped loving Mom," Elena said. "But he loved you too, completely and honestly." This ring represents both of those loves, the one that shaped his youth and the one that blessed his final years. I slipped the ring onto my right hand, where it caught the morning light streaming through the kitchen window. It felt like a benediction, a blessing from the woman who had come before me, an acknowledgement that love could be shared across time and memory. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Elena reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you for making Dad happy. Thank you for giving him 3 years of joy instead of 3 years of loneliness. Thank you for loving him enough to let him love you back." As Elena prepared to leave, she paused at the front door and looked around the entryway with new eyes. "This house is lucky to have you, Margaret. It's been loved by 2 good women now, and that's something special." After she left, I walked through the house that was finally, truly mine. In the living room, the family photographs told the complete story of Harold's life, his first love, his children, his second chance at happiness. In the kitchen, Elena's casserole sat in the refrigerator next to my own cooking. A symbol of the family we were slowly, carefully becoming. And in the study, Harold's books shared space with mine, his memories preserved alongside my dreams for the future. I had been displaced from my chair at Harold's funeral, moved to the second row like an afterthought. But his will had given me something more valuable than a seat in the front row. It had given me a place in his legacy, a role in his story that no one could take away. The house was mine now, but more than that, I belonged to it. I was its keeper, its guardian, the woman entrusted with preserving its past while building its future. Harold had been right about one thing: 3 years had been enough. Enough to matter, enough to change everything, enough to prove that love could bloom at any age, in any season, for anyone brave enough to tend it.